Welcome to Studio Visits with Silver Eye, where I get to talk in depth with some of the most interesting contemporary photographers working today about their latest projects. I'm David Oresick, the Executive Director of Silver Eye Center for Photography. You can visit us online at silvereye.org to learn more about our programs, and you can also find a helpful glossary for the references in these conversations. In this episode, I spoke with Patricia Voulgaris, a photographer and artist based in New York City. Patricia graduated from the School of Visual Arts with a BFA in photography. Her work has been exhibited in numerous places, including the Aperture Foundation, the Rubber Factory, Red Hook Labs, and Baxter Street at CCNY. She was scheduled to be part of an exhibition here at Silver Eye with Whitney Hubbs this coming winter, but the show, of course, has been postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Make sure you subscribe to our email newsletter to learn when we are able to reschedule that and all our other exhibitions. This interview was so intriguing to me because in some ways Patricia's work feels really straightforward, beautifully made, precise portraits that are just really classic and timeless feeling. And in other ways, her work is really hard to categorize because the pictures involve layers of performance, sculpture, conceptual art, and more. In this conversation, we get into all of that, and we also get to talk about Patricia's enduring interest in how her body is perceived, her love of the movie Kill Bill, and why it's so important for her to keep trying new things in her artwork. Enjoy this studio visit with Patricia Voulgaris. Patricia Voulgaris, welcome to Studio Visits with Silver Eye.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, awesome. It was a pleasure to have you. So we were just talking a little bit before we started recording, and I was trying to remember when I first saw your work, and actually uh, our assistant curator, Kate Kelly, shared the work with me, and I think she was thinking about an exhibition that will happen some date in the future with your work, thinking about women's bodies and how women depict their own bodies in many ways. And your studio portraiture, self-portraiture of your body and these objects is really striking. I mean, it was the a kind of images that really kind of stopped me in my tracks when I first saw them for a number of different reasons that I think we'll get into. But I was just curious if you could tell me what led you to using yourself as a subject for your photography.
And when I was doing my undergrad at the School of Visual Arts, I started taking photographs of my family, and then I also started taking photographs of myself. And it was purely pretty much just trying to figure out how to, express what I wanted to say with photography, and also finding a way to understand what I wanted to talk about, how I understood myself, how I viewed myself. And so I started purely as a documentary photographer. And then, I started taking more photographs of myself over time. And I was really sort of fascinated by in the ways in which I could, construct images, manipulate, my body and myself in the frame, and through movements and through gesture. And so that's really when I started to kind of think of myself as, a self-portrait artist. And it was really nice because I felt sort of limited in the ways when I was photographing my family. There was only so much I could push my family to do, like there was, in some ways, in some specific photographs, I wanted them to maybe do something a little bit that, was out of character from them. And they would just say no, or, and I'm just like, it's so frustrating trying to get the shot when you also have to be respectful to your family. So then I was just sort of like, you know what, I'm just going to do it myself. And that was partially the reason I think why too is I kept photographing myself, is because I sort of felt disappointed in the ways that photography and my relationship with my parents were limiting in some ways. And I was just like, if I'm going to do these self portraits, like I really want to go for it. I really want to make something that I'm really happy with. And I think a lot of it too has to deal with control. So that's sort of like where I started from. And then when I entered my senior year, I just kind of ran with it.
So looking at these pictures and hearing you talk about them, I think I'm beginning to see the answer to my next question, but maybe you can talk about this a little bit more, which is you're so fragmented, right? And you're often hiding behind materials, and you're very kind of elusive in these pictures. And I began to wonder almost immediately when I looked at these pictures if you conceived of them as self-portraits. and in your last answer, you were talking about them as self-portraits, and I guess the difference being like, is it sort of a portrait of you, or is it a picture where your body is kind of part of the composition? And I was just curious, what does it mean? What does a self-portrait mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that I sort of approached first making these photographs, I wanted to use my body, and I was really craving that control and that construction. And so by putting myself in the frame, I had that control to show the parts that I wanted to show. And I used the materials and the paper to really sort of mask off parts of my body that like I didn't want to, be seen. Like I sort of made this like rule with myself, like I don't want to show my face. I just wanted to show the parts of myself that I felt comfortable showing. And I think this is sort of, I think with many women, maybe not all, we sort of are very conscious of the way that we represent ourselves. Am I showing too much of like my breast or my leg, or is it not enough? It's all these ideas that sort of at least go through my mind a lot. I'm very conscious of the way that I represent my body when I enter a space, when I'm around, coworkers, or when I'm at home, or with just family members. And so I began to think a lot about a lot about how my body is sort of represented in the space, and how it's interpreted by other people.
What's so interesting to me about so many of the photos is what part of yourself you're revealing and how you're revealing it. And they're so kind of creatively done, and really, I think, masterfully done. Thinking about, here's like a hip, and here's an elbow, and here's, your back. Things that are really like creative poses as well. Like, right, nothing's a kind of anywhere near a traditional portraiture pose. I was
Yeah.
wondering maybe if there was maybe a specific image, that you could talk about in terms of how you conceived of the pose and the materials and the composition.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the one that's sort of like it's covering the ear. So I remember when I was creating this photograph, it came directly after the braid image. The braid image was the first image that I made for this series. And, I was thinking a lot about that photograph, and I was also it's my mom underneath the paper as well, and underneath all of this. That was really sort of my first kind of like segue of using my parents in a different way, like, okay, can you just sort of, and this is not a complicated pose at all, which is really sort of interesting. She's just sitting behind all of this.
Hmm.
She's just sitting in a chair, and I literally just like laid everything on her. And I really wanted to, I was thinking about the way that her ear was sort of like curled, and how that mimics a circle, and how that also reminds me of like fashion. That circle could remind me of an earring. And so I was really sort of playing off of all of these ideas of like fashion and fine art. And then, I was also listening to, at the time, my classmates talking about like fashion and how I can combine the two. And so it was really sort of an experimental and a time of play that I was making these images. And I think that that is really sort of expressed in these as well. I think it was important for me to also too, just to take a chance, just to see what would happen if I put that black piece of paper on her hair. What would that look like? And I would just take chances, and I would just say to myself, like, what the hell, like, let myself like play, let myself use these materials in a way that like I haven't thought about before.
Well, I totally get that feeling of playfulness in these constructions, and the layering and the sort of exploration of materials. And I mean, and I think that was something else I began wondering about these images when I first saw them, was to what degree do you work in a pre-planned way versus a intuitive, like making it as you're going kind of way?
A lot of these images at first were very planned, and then what I would do is pretty much use whatever materials I had left over and whatever I had at my parents' house, and I would just sort of like create these little sets. Or I would be inspired by like a painting I saw, or a photograph, and I would just like create these sets out of like foam core, and just like, and sort of run with it. And a lot of time, it would take a lot of time at times, to really create these things, and to also, I had to fit myself into these sets. So it was a lot of work trying to figure out how my body would fit into the set, how I would figure out the lighting situation, and a lot of these images are really sort of, they're crafted in a way where there's like 5 inches of space that I have to like put, my back into or my arm. And so I also had to really think about how everything was going to come together at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Um,
One of the things that really stands out to me about all your work, but especially your still photography work, is this super close attention to light and
yeah,
where light is in your compositions, and light and shadow becoming, as important as the body and the cardboard and the seamless, in terms of making that final image, which I, it's just something I love to see and marvel. It's so beautiful and so elegant. And that got me kind of wondering w- about your kind of visual influences. And I see so many different things that really struck me. The thing that sort of came to me first, I came up in Chicago, so I think I was thinking about Harry Callahan, and especially those really high key pictures of Eleanor. I was
yeah,
thinking about Richard Avedon. I was thinking about, actually thinking a lot about Picasso and Cubism, and a kind of chopped up, body, in a kind of really complicated composition that comes from painting, and strikes me as really difficult to translate into a photograph, but it looks so effortless in your pictures. What did you see as your big influences for these compositions?
yeah. I mean, I was looking at all types of art. I wasn't just like, I'm going to focus on painting, I'm going to focus on photography. I was really looking at surrealists, uh, anything from like Rothko to Dali, to just super like random people, where I was just trying to expose to myself to as much art as possible, and to be open to the fact to seeing things differently. Like I was so tired of looking at like a traditional modes of like painting a woman or a landscape, and I wanted to do something differently that felt true to me. I don't view myself as this sort of this whole body. I think that there's a very big disconnect with my body from my mind, and I feel that the two are sort of separate, and it made sense to sort of portray myself as this fragment. I think I was thinking a lot about how I can sort of how I've seen myself throughout the years, right? How I've grown into a woman, thinking about my experiences growing up, and how those experiences influence the way that I view myself today.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that question, or that kind of point you made about kind of feeling like your mind and your body were separate. Because I was, looking at a lot of your work. I think how in tune with your body you must be
Yeah.
to be able to make these compositions, working in the studio, almost like a dancer or like a performer, right?
Um,
Did the process of making these pictures or seeing these pictures change how you, felt about your body or saw yourself?
yeah, I mean, I think that these were definitely in a way therapeutic. I think that it let me sort of let go of some of the body issues that I was sort of facing, in the way that like I think I viewed myself really sort of negatively. And at the end of the day, I said to myself, like, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to go for it. I'm not going to like hold back. I'm really going to work through this and use this as an opportunity to, in a way, I mean, really feel better about myself. And I think that it's also important to think about the ways in which your art can help other people, can help yourself. I think that I was thinking about myself as a dancer, as a different form, and thinking about myself as this transformative being, as something that's not just grounded. Like
Hmm.
there are many moments where it feels like I'm just kind of floating in space, and I'm just this sort of like being that's existing within this like, sterile environment. And so it was a lot of, I did do a lot of research on poses and different ways, um, different ways to sort of like express my body. And I also was just interested in challenging myself. I was like, how long can I hold this pose? How long can I push myself until I'm totally exhausted? And maybe that's the photograph. I think with a lot of these, some of them, they look really simple. But I was up in the attic, like working on these photographs for like hours. You wouldn't know that by just looking at it. It's especially with this clock tower one. Yeah, this one I shot probably, I don't even know. I think I shot this like at least like 20 times. Like I shot it, like I think I worked on this photograph for like a whole month. There's a first version of this that I didn't like, and then this was the second version that I was really happy with. But it was a lot to hold that pose and like to also hide everything else that I didn't want the viewer to see.
Again, I think one of the reasons I came to that Avedon idea is the effortlessness of a crazy pose, and just like, you just see it and it just feels like, kind of natural. And the more you think about it, the more you're like, wait, how did they get, into
Yeah.
that? And I'm assuming you're working largely by yourself. You don't have assistants
No,
helping you,
no.
and you're not retouching a thing
Yeah,
out in
no,
Photoshop.
I pretty much just dodge and burn, honestly. Like I'm not like retouching every single zit on my leg or what I'm saying. I mean I like those features. I think that that just it feels, that's my body at the moment. I'm not
Hmm.
gonna like sit here and Photoshop myself. Like it's just ridiculous to me. I don't know.
I mean, there is such an ease with the body in these photos,
Mhm.
and it is, disjointed, and you see sort of segments, and it's never a complete body that you show us with in these earlier series, um, but it always feels very natural and sort of low effort, which is
Yeah,
again, which of course I know it's not, but
yeah.
it feels so elegant.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's something that I was also thinking about too is, how do I create something that feels effortless, but really like, months and, tears and sweat has gone into this. And I think that's sort of one of the strongest things about my work.
I wanted to sort of transition and talk about some of the newer bodies of work that you shared with us, and I think there's a really interesting evolution, or just interesting way that your attentions have shifted and what you're focusing on.
Yeah.
Um, this body of work that you shared with us, you began working with yourself as the photographer, model, art director, taking on every role of the shoot, and really thinking about these incredibly creative, ambitious, strange, wonderful poses. And then you began another body of work that takes a very different approach called Pose Me, where you no longer chose the poses. Can you kind of explain the premise of this body of work and what led you there?
Yeah, I think what really sort of influenced this body of work is I was no longer living at home in Long Island. I moved to New York City. And so um, that's when I really started beginning, making work at home and making work in my apartment. And I thought to myself, I want to continue making something now that I have access to my friends, people that are closer to me. I was really interested in collaboration. I had all these ideas sort of on the back burner, and when I moved, to the city, I was like, I want to start this project called Pose Me, where I invited men over to my apartment and I asked them to pose me in the ways that they wanted to, and just shoot a roll of film on a Hasselblad. Um, and so these are portraits by friends, acquaintances. Some of them are really really striking, really beautiful, and others are sort of they're very sort of dark in some ways as well, whether visually or emotionally. I think what I was really thinking about, getting more into detail about it, was not being in control anymore. I was tired of sort of having all this control, having all of this responsibility. And I said to myself, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to give up this control and responsibility to somebody else. And understand how I'm being viewed specifically by men. And I think that's something that I have struggled to understand my entire life, how men view me. And also, I mean, also women, but also I think with men more so. And so I started this project in a way to understand more, even more about myself. Like, how, am I now being represented by another person?
How did it feel to give up the control?
It felt great. I mean, I was like, I think that this is something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I just needed to find a way to do it, And by now having access, I was able to do that, and I think it's this really interesting balance between the constructed work and now the work that I'm having all of these men now, in a sense, project onto me, And when we're taking these photographs, I'm also very sort of quiet. I'm not trying to, give them any sorts of an idea, or it's purely just them projecting whatever ideas and thoughts that they want onto me. I'm literally representing myself as like a blank canvas. That's what I tell them, and I'm like, okay, just go for it. Nothing is all out of bounds.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's a fascinating project to me because knowing your earlier work and hearing you sort of talk about having that just exacting level of control over every detail and being so attuned to, where every shadow is falling and everything like that within it
yeah,
to to give that up in your
yeah,
images, it must be, it's almost like a little bit thrilling, maybe is the word, right? To let go of that control.
yeah. I agree. I think a lot of like, I'd say photography is mostly about control. So I was thinking to myself, I don't want to be in control anymore. I want to give up that control and responsibility, and I want to make more collaborative works. And I think that it's important for you to grow as an artist and to realize, you could be known for this one little thing, but why be known for this one little thing when there's so much more to you? It's just that whole idea of like being known for this one sort of particular way of photographing is so boring to me.
Hmm.
Like I want to do different things. I want to push myself. I want to grow as an artist, and I want to surprise people.
I think that's fascinating, and that's a sentiment I know a lot of artists share, and that impulse to not repeat yourself, and yet I think every artist who is making work that is true to themselves, like
Right.
there's threads, there's parts of yourself that you can't change, right? That
Yeah.
will always be who you are, and I, particularly in the bodies of work I've seen of yours, just an enduring fascination with the body and perceptions of the body,
Yeah.
and wanting to understand how how it feels to see and to be seen,
Yeah.
for different people and for yourself. And maybe to transition to a newer body of work that I think continues a lot of those threads. I also just got a zine kind of version of this body of work called, the zine is called The Hunters. Again, this body of work, so I don't have a lot of information about it. I've just been responding to it over the last couple days very intuitively, and it's dark and it picks up on some themes about violence that I know are sort of subtle in I think earlier bodies of work that we've talked about, but become more pronounced and more present here. Tell me about these newest photographs and where they came from.
I started working on um, this video project where I was gathering a whole bunch of YouTube clips of particularly like women in film. And as I was doing some research, I noticed like three particularly like disturbing scenes that were like trending throughout, mainstream films of like men slapping women, especially in like James Bond films, people jumping off of cliffs, car crashes, and I was really disturbed by all of these sort of trends, quote unquote, that I was finding um, throughout YouTube. And I kind of was like really obsessed with just collecting clips, and I started putting them all together. That really inspired me and gave me the idea to investigate my relationship with violence, and how, violence affects me as a woman daily walking down the street, just daily interactions that aren't necessarily maybe physically violent, but emotionally damaging. And so I think it ties back with the earlier works as well, because I was, I sort of call it actively like participating, not in physical act of violence, but the materials that I was using, cutting, gluing, putting things together, destroying things. Uh, that I think to me is a form of violence. And I'm not doing physical harm to my body, but I am destroying and re-putting together the materials that I was using to create something new. There is, I think, this thread of violence happening throughout my work, and so I became really interested in that. Sort of became that video that I constructed became the main source of inspiration and thought behind how can I investigate all these different sort of ideas surrounding violence, and what does it mean to be, a woman today. And so I became really sort of fascinated constructing, again, even more like constructing narratives instead of working in the studio and just using myself. They're a lot more collaborative. Some of these photographs don't, I'm not even featured in them. Like sort of like entering this different mindset, this very dark void that I've kind of segued into. And I don't really know like how how I began. It's so hard because it's just sort of like it just kind of came to me.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that video, lots of different moments of Hollywood violence and screen violence and violence as it's seen through the television and as I was watching on a laptop as it's seen through the
Yeah.
laptop and the internet. I began to think of a lot of these images as representing seeing them as an emotional state too,
Mhm.
a sort of an emotional response to witnessing a lot of kind of Hollywood's kind of bizarre, cartoonish, but also impactful depictions of violence and violence against women.
I think also too, I in a way I felt like, okay, I have to sort of become this like character. I was like I watched like Kill Bill over and over again, and like I was just like studying that film for a while and thinking of and trying to put myself in the mindset of also these characters who were experiencing the violence. What does it mean to get that revenge? Are you fulfilled after you kill the guy that killed your son or something like that? Like there were always these like crazy scenarios where these women were constantly like trying to fight through and to achieve some sort of vengeance. And I think in a way I related to that, like trying to fight through it to get back at that guy who catcalled me on the street. And you know what I'm saying? Like there's always like
Mm,
there's like you're just supposed to walk by and ignore it, and it's just like, well, what if you stopped and you didn't, and
hmm.
I like this idea of like also provoking. And maybe it sounds terrible, an eye for an eye, but I think sometimes like it feels good to stand up for yourself and to fight back, and I think that it's really important, at least for me, to feel empowered and to empower other people. And maybe fighting violence with violence isn't the answer, but I think with a lot of these movies that I was watching, it certainly is, and it certainly feels that way. Um, and also too, like these forms of violence are packaged as this entertainment. It's like it's very bizarre
Mm.
to me that it's packaged in a way that we're supposed to consume it in a certain way and just accept it. And it's like watching a person be decapitated is like nothing anymore. It's just like it's so bizarre to me that you know it's like we've just accepted this as a culture. um so that's sort of what I was thinking about a lot as well.
Yeah, and I think that's just really interesting to me because I find myself kind of agreeing with some of what you're saying and kind of thinking that you're almost like providing a counterpoint with these photographs,
Right.
right? Like in some ways, I find myself feeling very desensitized to Hollywood violence, but sometimes I feel myself, especially as I'm getting older and you know thinking about some things differently, I find myself feeling very hypersensitive to depictions of
Yeah.
violence, and I found myself feeling hypersensitive to the depictions of violence in a lot of these images. This image in particular of basically someone drowning someone in a bucket, just like it, it's really a striking image. It has all your kind of hallmarks of just like wonderfully creative and innovative composition, and it is like it is a scary picture.
Yeah, it definitely it's a scary one. um but I don't know, I just also too like I there are times when I literally when I was watching things and I just felt like I wanted to just like put my head in a bucket and drown myself. And then I think a lot of these, like literally I was just thinking of, oh my god, this is so awful, I have to do this action, like these the like a lot of the photographs I think are responses into what I was watching, into what I was feeling. And so these responses are literally just how I felt. I felt like I needed to put my head in a bucket. I needed to burn, the house down to build a better life, or to, think about the ways in which I could empower myself or feel better about what I was viewing.
Mm.
And I think that when, we slow film down and we can just view it as a still, sometimes it can be even more powerful. It really makes you stop and think. Not that film isn't equally powerful, but for me personally, I think when I slow things down and I look at a still image, I can think clearly, I can think better, and I'm like, wow, this is powerful. This has a punch to it.
Can you tell me about this talcum powder picture, or baby or whatever
Yeah.
kind of powder?
So I was thinking about so the house was burnt down, right? We had the photograph of the wooden house being burnt. And I was thinking, oh, what about the people inside? What are they doing? How are they gonna get out of the house? So I I put like this sheet on myself. That's my mom actually. She has the powder and she's squeezing it on me. So I was thinking about like the house burning and the people escaping, the violence that you're experiencing, and also this idea of, the camera is now the sort of the spectator, right? The camera is just a bystander to all the destruction that's happening.
My other image that I'm just fascinated to hear you talk about, one that's really, again, I think thinking about the sort of these threads of kind of a really dark humor that are in this Hunter
Yeah.
series zine, in this kind of alligator head or dinosaur head with those knives. I mean, it is like, thinking about your interest in cinema, really clarifying how cinematic
Mhm.
so much of this vision is.
My friend gifted me the gator head and it was sitting on my, fireplace. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. I have to do something with it. And, I was at the time I was really thinking about this scene. I was like, The Hunter is an amazing title. It represents everything that I'm thinking about currently. Am I doing the hunting or is somebody hunting me? Like the title is sort of very mysterious and open in that way. And I think this is another sort of perfect example of, me becoming that character that's now hunting and going for my revenge, and taking back my power. Like it kind of just came to me. I was like, yeah, like I want to tie knives to my hands. I want to be as crazy and violent as possible. And so I've been kind of going back and forth between becoming this violent character and also, not, and being a little bit more sympathetic. And I think that this image is really powerful in the way that it's terrifying. It's completely terrifying. It looks straight out of like a horror movie, but it makes you think about all those ways of empowering yourself also. Like that's this I know it's very strange, but that this is what this image really sort of makes me feel. It makes me feel empowered in a way.
Well, thinking about a couple threads that I see in all three of these kind of bodies of work being transformation,
Yeah.
and you using these images to sort of take your ordinary self and become a new kind of self.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, going from the early pictures where you become a really elegant, still, pristine, kind of reduced, kind of segmented body part, to becoming someone else's vision of yourself in the Pose Me series. And here, with this picture in particular, transforming into a dragon, something really fierce and scary and powerful, and adopting another persona.
Definitely. And I think that, you know, I've always been interested in performing for the camera and performing these different sort of transformations in these characters. And I think, you know, this is something that's totally new for me. And I wanted to really kind of not totally walk away from what I was doing in the past, but I wanted to transform it in a way that felt different and kind of really took people by surprise, you know, like there is this sort of, I think, violent undertone in my work that maybe wasn't apparent in the previous works, but I think now I'm really sort of embracing it and I'm just going for it, and very much about how the actions now influence, I think, my body and my perception, and I just kind of, I'm letting loose even more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a really, really well put kind of thoughts on evolution and change and kind of
Yeah,
creatively pushing yourself.
yeah.
Well, Patricia, thank you so much for sharing the work with us today.
No problem. Thank you. It's been fun.